and maybe maximize advantages if there are any advantages that might seem apparent. This last slide here, really, I think it's my last one, is about training times. We've been talking primarily about when the matches are, but what about training? You would think, based on the human physiology, that there would be an optimal time of day to train. The other thing that you would think, especially for somebody that comes out of the lab that I work in, what we're really interested in is how the body adapts to regular schedules, and not just of light, but how the body and circadian timing system adapts to things like scheduled feeding. If we alter the time at which an animal is fed, the animal's internal rhythms become synchronized to that new meal time. The body adapts to it, and so the animal becomes, its sleep-wake schedule changes, so it becomes spontaneously awake prior to the time that it normally finds food. And so based on the idea that clocks would have this built-in flexibility and sensitivity to important things in the environment, you might predict that if you train at the same time every single day, that biological rhythms would synchronize with that training event. And then secondly, you might predict that your performance would be optimal at the time of day that you normally train. So that would lead you to believe that maybe what you should do is always train at the time of day when matches would occur. So if you were lucky enough to always be playing, let's say in the evening, or always be playing in the afternoon, relatively little variability in game match times, then I would suspect, there's no evidence for this, but I would suspect that performance at game time would be best if that was the time of day that you always trained. And I was at a conference just a few weeks ago, and there was one elite athlete there, and there were some people that are as highly knowledgeable in the area of human chronobiology as there are on the planet. So it was an interesting group to spend some time with. One of them was an elite athlete. He's a chronobiologist, but he's also ranked #2 in the world in Ironman for his age category. He's like 55, he's in the 55 or 60 range, something like that. And I asked him that specific question. Does training time matter, and can we get improved performance by matching the training time with match times? And he said, we don't know. There is no data on that. Because it's something that's real, because he's training all the time. He's either doing science or training. And so that data is not there, but it is something to think about. I don't know what time you guys do your training. I don't know how it matches up with game times, but it is something that, just to let you know in any case, we don't know how important that is, but we would suspect that probably might be some way to gain a small advantage. So let's say you were always playing in the evenings, then that would mean that the most common training time would be evenings. But then in a sense you're working an evening shift schedule. It's like people that go to work in the evening, come home at midnight. That may not be the kind of trade-off that people are willing to make if they have families, etc. I'm going to throw that out there as something that's potentially of interest. So that's it for my academic presentation. What I've done is I've given you a general recommendation, some of the biology, some of the science behind it, and a general idea of the kinds of recommendations that can be made to minimize the disadvantages of time of day as a variable in sport performance and to maximize advantages. So I'm happy to take any specific questions now. Yep.
Can you just sort of make some comments? We also got a lot of kids as young as 13 in our academy in terms of, I presume most of what you're talking about is for that adult group.
Yeah.
Any other pearls or thoughts that we should take into consideration for that adolescent group?
Yeah, I think that early morning training for adolescents is really misguided, personally. The sense, and this is relevant to a lot of broader issues. One of the issues that's been discussed a lot in the academic world in the past 15 or 20 years has been the whole issue of school start times. With the recognition that adolescents, in fact, are biologically phase delayed relative to adults. That early morning school start times are robbing the kids of sleep, and it's compounded by the electronic world that we live in, with access to computers and televisions, et cetera, lots of things to keep you up at night, and also things that are shining light on kids. And consequently, and there's hard evidence for this, that kids are sleeping a lot less than they used to, probably by up to an hour and a half less than they were a century ago. So this is going to have an impact on their emotions. It's going to have an impact on their ability to perform in school. It has an impact probably on their metabolism as well, because we know that sleep restriction affects metabolism and is suspected as being one of the causes of the so-called epidemic of obesity that we're seeing, that has kind of exploded over the Western world. And interestingly, the timing of that correlates nicely with the increase in electronic social media, the kinds of things that can keep people up at night, like workstations, etc. So that's a long answer to your question, but early day training I don't think is good for kids. Anything that might potentially interrupt their sleep. So when I hear about kids that have to get up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning to train, I just think that that's potentially really misguided.
And the other thing I think it would be important is to give them some guidelines about that screen time late in the day.
Yes.
As well, because biologically they're
Yeah.
just reinforcing a bad stress on their bodies.
Yeah,
So they're trying to get them away from studying later or using their computers.
Yeah.
What would the cutoff time be for that, for kids and screen time?
It would certainly vary by age, even within the teen years. But I would want to cut it off, certainly mid-evening, certainly no later than 10, but that's probably already later than it should be.
Like how many
I know
hours
it's realistic. I mean, I could say 8 p.m. and no more computer, but
What about relation, obviously I've got younger kids with 13, so they'll be in bed by 8:30, 9 o'clock, so is there a specific amount of time that you would recommend that
I would say, yeah,
2-3 hours?
a couple hours, yeah. Certainly at least an hour before bedtime.
So if the Whitecaps had a player who was on this team playing in this program and then suddenly got called to international duty in Africa or Europe or something like that,
Yeah,
they'd be away for how long? A week, 10 days?
yeah.
So for that person to come back and be able to play optimally back in the Whitecaps would be pretty important to work out sort of an individual schedule,
Absolutely.
right? So that you want to take when they're leaving, when they're training, when they're practicing, when they're
Everything that
flying
I've
back.
said is everything that I've said applies triply for people that are competing transcontinentally, because that's where the real issues are, not just in, do we care how well they do when they get to Africa or Europe? I don't know, but when they come back, we definitely want them
Yeah.
performing well again. So there's issues in both directions, and the kind of technology that I've been talking about here really works well for that. That's where the real advantage is.
And that would serve to minimize the impact.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Two questions. One is, what about sleep aids like Ambien and Ativan
Yeah.
for athletes, and what kind of quality of sleep they get with that? And then the other question is injury patterns with sleep deprivation. Is there any studies out there that show that injuries go up with sleep deprivation?
I like that one. That's a good question. As far as the hypnotics goes, the literature that's available indicates that, that there aren't any obvious effects of using standard hypnotics on performance the day after. So hangover effects for competition is not been identified as being a big problem. And the same with melatonin as well.
So if we flying East Coast, one of the athletes couldn't help but just fall asleep on most of the flight. You
Yeah.
get there 11 o'clock in the evening,